September 13th, 1944, 06-3. Hürtgen Forest, Germany. Feldwebel Heinrich Vogler pressed his back against the wet bark of a shattered pine tree, his hands trembling as he fumbled with the stripper clip for his Carabiner 98K. Around him, the forest had become a slaughterhouse. The pre-dawn darkness was splitting apart with muzzle flashes, the crash of grenades, and the screams of dying men from both sides of the line. His fingers found the clip. 5 rounds. He'd done this 10,000 times in training. Could load the Mauser in his sleep, but his hands wouldn't stop shaking. He pressed the clip into the magazine, pushed down, felt the rounds slide into place, worked the bolt forward, and raised the rifle toward the American positions 30 meters away. He never got the shot off. The American who killed him fired 8 rounds in less than 4 seconds. Vogler heard the first shot, felt the impact in his chest before his brain registered the sound of the second, and was dead before the third casing hit the forest floor. His Mauser, still loaded with its 5 fresh rounds, fell into the mud beside him, 20 meters to Vogler's left. Obergefreiter Karl Brenner witnessed his squad leader's death through the gray morning mist. Brenner was a veteran of the Eastern Front, a survivor of a man who had killed Russians with bayonets, an entrenching tool when ammunition ran out. He had seen every form of death the war could offer, but he had never seen anything like this. The Americans were advancing through the forests in short rushes, their rifles cracking in rapid succession. Not the measured, deliberate fire of bolt-action weapons, but something faster, more sustained, more terrifying. Each American rifleman seemed to possess the firepower of 3 German soldiers. They fired, moved, fired again, never pausing to work a bolt, never breaking their aim to chamber another round. Brenner raised his own Carabiner 98K, found an American silhouette against the lightning sky, and fired. The American stumbled, but didn't fall. Brenner worked the bolt, ejecting the spent casing, chambering a fresh round. He raised the rifle again. The American was already shooting back. The first round struck the tree beside Brenner's head, showering him with splinters. The second passed so close he felt the wind of its passage. The third took him in the shoulder, spinning him around. The fourth, fifth, and sixth followed before he hit the ground. As Brenner lay dying in the frozen mud, his blood steaming in the cold morning air, a single thought crystallized in his fading consciousness. The Americans had rifles that fired like machine guns. He was wrong about the mechanism, but right about the effect. The weapon that killed him, that was killing German soldiers across every front where Americans fought, was the M1 Garand, the first semi-automatic rifle ever issued as standard infantry equipment by any nation on Earth. And it was changing the nature of infantry combat forever. The story of the M1 Garand begins not on a battlefield, but in a cluttered workshop in Springfield, Massachusetts, where a Canadian-born engineer named John Cantia. Garand had been laboring for nearly 2 decades to solve a problem that military theorists had debated since the invention of the repeating rifle. The problem was simple to state and maddeningly difficult to solve. How do you make a rifle that loads itself? Every major military rifle of the First World War had been a bolt-action design. The Hurtgen 98, the British Lee Enfield, the French the American Springfield 1903, all required the shooter to manually operate a bolt mechanism between each shot, pull the trigger, work the bolt back to eject the spent casing, push the bolt forward to chamber a fresh round, then fire again. A trained soldier could fire perhaps 15 aimed shots per minute, but the mechanical operation broke his concentration, disturbed his aim, and slowed his rate of fire. The machine gun had solved this problem through sheer mechanical complexity and size. Gas pressure or recoil energy could be harnessed to cycle the action automatically, but the mechanisms required were heavy, bulky, and prone to overheating. Machine guns were crew-served weapons, mounted on tripods or vehicles, not individual arms that a rifleman could carry into battle. What armies wanted was something in between, a rifle light enough for one man to carry, reliable enough for the mud and filth of combat, but capable of firing multiple rounds with a single trigger operation. A semi-automatic rifle that would fire 1 round with each trigger pull, automatically ejecting the spent case and chambering the next round, ready for the next shot. without any manual manipulation. Every major arms-producing nation pursued this goal in the years after 1918. All of them failed to achieve it in time for the next war, except one. John Garand had emigrated from Quebec to Connecticut as a child and grown up working in textile mills, developing an intuitive understanding of machinery that would serve him throughout his career. He was largely self-taught in firearms design, but his mechanical aptitude was extraordinary. By 1919, when he joined the Springfield Armory as a consulting engineer, he had already been experimenting with semi-automatic rifle designs for several years. The challenges were formidable. A semi-automatic rifle had to harness the energy of the cartridge's discharge to operate its action, but that energy was violent and unpredictable. Too much force and the action would batter itself to pieces. Too little and it would fail to cycle. The mechanism had to function reliably in extreme cold, extreme heat, dust, mud, rain, and snow. It had to be simple enough for average soldiers to maintain and robust enough to survive the brutal handling of combat. Over the next 17 years, Garand designed, built, tested, and redesigned prototype after prototype. His early designs used a primer-actuated mechanism that proved too delicate for military use. He shifted to gas operation, tapping a small amount of propellant gas from the barrel to drive a piston that cycled the action. This approach was more robust, but introduced new complications in timing and pressure management. The bureaucratic obstacles were as challenging as the engineering ones. The Army Ordnance Department was conservative, skeptical of new technology, and protective of existing investments. Senior officers who had won their careers with bolt-action rifles saw no need for change. Budget constraints during the Depression years, limited testing and development, political interference, complicated procurement decisions. Through it all, Garand persevered. He worked in near obscurity, refining his design incrementally, solving one problem only to discover three more. His workshop at Springfield Armory became a second home, often his primary home, as he labored nights and weekends on the rifle that bore his name. The breakthrough came in 1934, when Garand perfected his gas-operated, rotating bolt design. The rifle used a long-stroke gas piston located beneath the barrel, which drove an operating rod connected to the bolt. When fired, gas pressure pushed the piston rearward, which rotated and unlocked the bolt, extracted and ejected the spent case, cocked the hammer, and compressed the operating spring. The spring then drove the mechanism forward, stripping a fresh round from the magazine and chambering it ready to fire. The genius of Garand's design lay in its simplicity and durability. The rifle contained only about 60 parts, far fewer than competing designs. The long-stroke piston, while heavier than alternatives, was virtually immune to fouling and required minimal maintenance. The rotating bolts, adapted from earlier designs, provided strong and reliable lockup. The trigger mechanism was straightforward, giving the rifle a clean, consistent pull that aided accurate shooting. M1 Garand was officially adopted by the United States Army on January 9, 1936. It was the first semi-automatic rifle ever, selected as the standard infantry arm of a major military power. The Army's decision was controversial, opposed by many officers who doubted the new rifle's reliability and worried about its complexity. But a cadre of forward-thinking ordnance officers, led by Major General Charles M. Wesson, pushed the adoption through over conservative objections. Production began slowly, hampered by the complexity of manufacturing and the limited capacity of Springfield Armory. By the time of Pearl Harbor, fewer than 50,000 M1 rifles had been produced, a fraction of what would be needed for the massive army the United States was about to raise. The Army was still issuing bolt-action Springfield 1903 rifles to many units, and it would take years before Garand production caught up with demand. But even in limited numbers, the new rifle was making an impression on the men who carried it. Sergeant First Class William Garner, who would later become famous as a member of Easy Company, 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment, remembered his first encounter with the M1 during basic training in 1942. "They handed me this rifle and I thought there must be some mistake," Garner recalled decades later. "I'd shot my uncle's hunting rifle growing up. Bolt action like every rifle I'd ever seen. The instructor told us this one fired 8 times without reloading, and I thought he was pulling our legs. Then we got to the range, and I pulled that trigger and the thing just kept shooting. 8 rounds. Bang, 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 bang. And I'm thinking, Jesus Christ, The Krauts don't have anything like this. Gunnar was right. The Germans didn't have anything like it. And that disparity would prove decisive on battlefields from North Africa to the heart of Germany. The German military establishment had pursued semi-automatic rifle development throughout the interwar period, but their efforts had been fragmented, underfunded, and ultimately unsuccessful. TGWR 41, introduced in limited numbers in 1941, was a semi-automatic design that proved unreliable in the brutal conditions of the Eastern Front. Its complex gas system failed quickly. Its manufacturing tolerances were too tight for mass production, and its troops distrusted it in favor of the proven Mauser bolt. The improved Guha 43, introduced in 1943, was a better design that borrowed elements from captured Soviet SVT-40 rifles. But it came too late and in too few numbers to affect the war's outcome. Germany produced approximately 400,000 Guha 43 rifles during the war, compared to over 4 million M1 Garands produced by the United States. More importantly, the G43 was issued primarily to designated marksmen and squad leaders, not as standard infantry equipment. The average German rifleman still carried the Carabiner 98K, a weapon whose fundamental design dated to the 1890s. The British and Soviets faced similar situations. The Soviet SVT-40 was a capable semi-automatic rifle, but manufacturing difficulties and reliability problems limited its distribution. Most Soviet infantry carried the Mosin-Nagant bolt-action rifle throughout the war. The British never fielded a semi-automatic rifle at all, relying on the venerable Lee Enfield from 1914 until well after 1945. Only the United States had the industrial capacity, the institutional foresight, and the engineering talent to produce a reliable semi-automatic rifle in the quantities needed to equip an entire army. By war's end, American factories had manufactured 4,028,397 M1 Garand rifles, enough to arm every infantry soldier in the U.S. Army, and Marine Corps with the most advanced personal weapon on any battlefield. The tactical implications of this advantage became apparent from the first major engagements of the war. On November 8, 1942, American forces landed in North Africa as part of Operation Torch, the first large-scale commitment of U.S. ground forces against the European Axis powers. The landings themselves faced relatively light opposition, but the weeks that followed brought American infantry into direct combat with German forces for the first time. At Kasserine Pass in February 1943, inexperienced American units suffered a humiliating defeat at the hands of Rommel's Afrika Korps. The battle exposed serious deficiencies in American tactics, leadership, and coordination. But even in defeat, observers noted something unusual about American firepower. Generalmajor Friedrich von Breuch, commanding the 10th Panzer Division's infantry component at Kasserine, reported to Army Group Africa headquarters on the American performance. The American infantry, while poorly led and easily routed, possessed astonishing firepower at the squad level. Their rifle fire was continuous, more like machine gun fire than ordinary infantry weapons. Prisoners confirmed they are equipped with a self-loading rifle that fires 8 rounds without manual reloading. Our men reported difficulty returning fire against such volume. Von Breuch's observation captured a tactical reality that would persist throughout the war. The M1 Garand didn't just fire faster than bolt-action rifles. It fired faster while maintaining accuracy. The shooter's eye never left the target. His cheek never lifted from the stock. His concentration never broke to operate a bolt. He simply pressed the trigger, absorbed the recoil, realigned his sights, and pressed the trigger again. This capability transforms small unit tactics in ways that are difficult to appreciate without understanding the mechanics of infantry combat. In a firefight, the side that achieves fire superiority typically wins. Fire superiority doesn't mean killing more enemies. It means putting so much lead downrange that the enemy cannot effectively return fire. Soldiers under heavy fire keep their heads down, move cautiously if at all, and shoot inaccurately if they shoot at all. The side with fire superiority can maneuver, can advance, can close with the enemy while the defenders are suppressed. With bolt-action rifles, achieving fire superiority required either machine guns, which were heavy and required crews, or numerical advantage in riflemen. A squad of 8 men with bolt-action rifles might produce a collective rate of fire of 120 aimed rounds per minute, with each man contributing 15 shots. A squad of 8 men with M1 Garands could produce 240 aimed rounds per minute, with each man contributing 30 shots. The semi-automatic mechanism effectively doubled the firepower of every American infantry squad without adding a single additional soldier. This advantage was not theoretical. It manifested in every engagement, in every theater, from the first shots of the war to the last. Staff Sergeant David Kenyon Webster of the 101st Airborne Division described the experience of firefights in his memoir, Parachute Infantry. The Germans had good soldiers, no question. They were well trained, aggressive, brave when they needed to be. But every time we got into a shooting match, we won. It wasn't because we were better soldiers, though maybe some of the boys were. It was the rifles. We could shoot them off their feet. They'd fire once, work their bolts, and we'd fire 3 times before they could get another round off. After a few minutes of that, they'd either surrender or die. The M1's advantage was particularly devastating in the close-range encounters that characterized combat in Europe's hedgerows, forests, and towns. In the bocage country of Normandy, where fighting often occurred at ranges of 50 meters or less, the ability to deliver rapid, accurate fire was frequently the difference between life and death. Private First Class Leon Standifer, who fought with the 94th Infantry Division in the Brittany campaign, described a typical hedgerow firefight. We came around a corner and there they were, maybe a dozen Germans in a sunken lane. Everyone opened up at once. I fired 8 rounds in about 5 seconds, dropped my empty clip, loaded another, and fired 8 more. By the time I was on my 3rd clip, it was over. We killed or wounded most of them. A few surrendered. The whole thing lasted maybe 30 seconds. If we'd had bolt-action rifles, it would have been a fair fight. With the Garands, it wasn't even close. The rifle's capacity of 8 rounds, fed from an en-bloc clip, was another advantage over its German counterpart. The Carabiner 98K held only 5 rounds, loaded from stripper clips. This meant German soldiers had to reload more frequently, exposing themselves or breaking their position to manipulate their ammunition more often than Americans. The M1's en-bloc clip system had its own peculiarity. When the last round was fired, the clip was ejected from the rifle with a distinctive metallic ping sound. Popular legend holds that German soldiers learned to listen for this sound, timing their advances to catch Americans while reloading. Veterans' accounts suggest this legend is largely myth. In the chaos and noise of combat, the ping of a single rifle's clip was usually inaudible, and even when it could be heard, the time required for a trained soldier to load a fresh clip, less than 2 seconds, was insufficient for practical exploitation. What the Germans did learn was to fear American rifle fire generally. Intelligence reports from Wehrmacht units throughout the war documented a consistent pattern of concern about American firepower. Generalleutnant Fritz Bayerlein, commanding the Panzerlehr Division during the Normandy campaign, reported to Army Group B on American infantry capabilities. The American infantry shows remarkable firepower in defense and attack. Each rifleman appears to carry a self-loading weapon that delivers fire comparable to our light machine guns. Combined with their plentiful automatic weapons, each American company possesses firepower equivalent to a German battalion. Our tactics must account for this disparity. Bayerlein's assessment, while perhaps exaggerated, captured a genuine reality. American infantry formations were more heavily armed than their German counterparts at every level. The M1 Garand was part of a system that included the Thompson submachine gun, the Browning automatic rifle bar, the M1 carbine, and lavish allocations of machine guns, mortars, and artillery support. But the Garand was the foundation, the basic weapon that every American rifleman carried, the source of the volume of fire that German officers consistently reported as overwhelming. The rifle's reliability under adverse conditions proved as important as its rate of fire. John Garand's design philosophy had emphasized durability and simplicity, and these qualities saved lives in the mud of Italy, the hedgerows of France, the snow of the Ardennes, and the coral dust of Pacific Islands. Technical Sergeant Henry Giles, an armorer with the 1st Infantry Division, maintained Garands throughout the European campaign. Those rifles took abuse that would have destroyed any other weapon I'd ever seen, Giles recalled. Mud, sand, snow, rain. I saw rifles dunked in rivers during crossings, dropped in the dirt, used as improvised pry bars, even run over by jeeps. Clean them out, maybe replace a spring now and then. And they kept shooting. I saw one rifle that a guy swore was run over by a tank during the Bulge. We replaced the stock, and it worked fine. The action was bent, but it still cycled. The long-stroke gas piston that critics had originally dismissed as heavy and old-fashioned proved ideally suited to the harsh conditions of combat. Unlike the shorter, lighter gas systems used in some competing designs, Garand's mechanism was relatively insensitive to carbon buildup and debris. It could fire hundreds of rounds between cleanings, tolerating neglect that would have jammed more sophisticated designs. This reliability mattered immensely to soldiers in combat. A rifle that jams at the critical moment is worse than no rifle at all, because it has absorbed training time, carrying weight, and psychological investment while delivering nothing when needed. The M1's reputation for reliability spread through the ranks by word of mouth, building confidence that translated into aggressive action under fire. Private First Class Earl Groover of the 29th Infantry Division expressed a common sentiment. I trusted that rifle like I trusted my mother. I knew with absolute certainty, that when I pointed it at a German and pulled the trigger, it was going to fire. Some of the guys who'd been issued carbines or captured German stuff weren't so sure about their weapons. That uncertainty makes you hesitant, makes you take that extra half second to think. I never hesitated. My rifle was going to work. Obderman Frederick Bertrand Rath, captured during the fighting in the Hürtgen forest, described the experience from the German perspective during his interrogation. We would establish our MG positions according to doctrine, with clear fields of fire and interlocking coverage. Against the Russians or British, these positions could hold for hours, days even. Against the Americans, we were suppressed almost immediately. Their rifle fire was so heavy, so continuous that our gunners could not raise their heads to aim. We had to withdraw repeatedly from positions that should have been impregnable. The Hurtgen Forest Campaign, which ground on from September 1944 to February 19, provided the most sustained test of the M1 Garand under the worst possible conditions. The dense forest canopy made artillery support ineffective. The narrow, winding trails negated armored support. The cold, wet conditions pushed men and equipment to their limits. Combat devolved to its most primitive form. Small groups of infantrymen fighting at close range for bunkers, foxholes, and individual trees. In these conditions, the Garand's advantages proved decisive despite the campaign's terrible casualties. German defenders dug into prepared positions, and fighting with the desperation of men defending their homeland should have held every advantage. The terrain favored defense, absolutely, but American units, however slowly and bloodily, continued to advance. The firepower differential that had emerged in easier terrain remained potent even in the forest's nightmare conditions. Lieutenant Richard Winters of Easy Company, 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment, led his men through several engagements that illustrated the Garand's tactical impact. During the attack on Foy in Belgium, Winters' lightly armed paratroopers faced German infantry in armor and fortified positions. The assault succeeded despite odds that conventional analysis would have deemed hopeless, in part because American rifle fire suppressed the defenders during critical moments of the advance. It wasn't magic, and it wasn't luck. Winters wrote in his memoir, "It was firepower and movement. We could put out enough rifle fire to make the Germans keep their heads down. And while they were down, we moved. When they came back up, we were somewhere else, still shooting. Their bolt-action rifles couldn't match our rate of fire. That simple fact made complicated things possible." The M1's reputation grew throughout the war, earning endorsements from sources that ranged from humble privates to the most senior commanders. General George S. Patton, never a man to offer praise lightly, called the M1 Garand the greatest battle implement ever devised, coming from a cavalry officer who loved tanks and mobile warfare. This assessment spoke to the rifle's fundamental importance in Patton's conception of modern combat. M1. Garand's impact extended beyond individual engagements to influence the entire conduct of American infantry operations. American tactical doctrine evolved to exploit the rifle's capabilities, emphasizing aggressive movement, rapid fire, and violent action at the decisive point. The Army's official infantry doctrine codified in Field Manual 7-10. Prescribed tactics built around the Garand's firepower, where German doctrine emphasized the machine gun as the squad's primary weapon, with riflemen serving mainly to protect and supply the gun crew. American doctrine made every rifleman a significant source of firepower. American squads could split into multiple fire teams, each capable of independent action, because each team carried rifles that could deliver sustained fire. This doctrinal difference shaped everything from movement formations to assault tactics. American infantry could attack in smaller groups, accepting more dispersed formations because their firepower did not depend on concentrating around crew-served weapons. They could respond more quickly to unexpected contacts because every soldier could immediately deliver effective fire rather than waiting for machine guns to deploy. Captain John Colby, who commanded an infantry company in the 90th Infantry Division during the European campaign, explained the tactical implications. The Germans thought in terms of machine gun positions. Everything revolved around where the MG-42s were sighted. Our thinking was different. Every one of my riflemen was a fire position. I could put 3 guys behind a wall and they could put out enough fire to pin down a platoon. That gave me flexibility the Germans didn't have. I could cover more ground, respond faster, because my firepower wasn't concentrated in a few crew-served weapons. The contrast became particularly stark in offensive operations. German defensive doctrine called for concentrating machine guns at key points, creating interlocking fields of fire that could devastate attacking infantry. Against enemies armed with bolt-action rifles, this approach was devastating. Attackers had to close within bayonet range to overcome the machine guns, suffering terrible casualties in the process. Against Americans armed with Garands, the calculus changed. The same German machine gun position that could dominate 100 meters of front against riflemen with bolt-action weapons could be suppressed by half a dozen Americans with semi-automatic rifles firing from covered positions. While some Americans kept the German gunners' heads down, others could maneuver to flanking positions, maintaining fire throughout the movement. General Douglas MacArthur, commanding the Southwest Pacific Theater, issued a formal letter of appreciation to John Garand in 1943. The M1 rifle has proven itself in the jungle fighting of the Pacific, as in every theater of this war. Its reliability, firepower, and ruggedness have made it the weapon of choice for every soldier fortunate enough to carry one. The nation owes you a debt of gratitude that can never be adequately repaid. Even German assessments, filtered through the lens of an enemy trying to understand his defeats, acknowledged Garand's impact. A German military intelligence assessment from late 19 captured after the war, analyzed American infantry equipment with clinical precision. The American semi-automatic rifle provides the enemy infantry with significant firepower advantages at the individual level, combined with plentiful automatic weapons and virtually unlimited ammunition supply. This creates a tactical situation in which German infantry, despite superior training and experience, frequently finds itself outgunned in direct engagements. The intelligence assessment recommended countermeasures, including increased machine gun allocations, improved defensive fieldworks, and priority development of German semi-automatic rifles. But by late 1944, Germany lacked the industrial capacity to implement any of these recommendations at meaningful scale. The nation that had pioneered armored warfare and jet aviation could not match American production of a weapon that fundamental to infantry combat. The Pacific Theater presented different challenges that further validated the Garand's design. The jungle environments of Guadalcanal, New Guinea, and the Philippines combined extreme humidity, torrential rain, and pervasive mud and conditions that corroded and jammed weapons with frightening speed. Temperatures ranged from tropical heat to the cold of mountain elevations. Salt air and water, corroded metal, insects, mold, and rot attacked every organic component. The M1 proved remarkably resistant to these conditions. Its chrome-lined barrel, an innovation added during production, resisted the corrosion that destroyed other weapons. Its robust action tolerated debris and contamination that jammed more delicate mechanisms. Its simple design allowed field maintenance with minimal tools and expertise. Sergeant Albin Josepi, a Marine correspondent who witnessed combat throughout the Pacific, noted the rifle's performance under these conditions. The Marines swore by their I saw rifles that had been submerged in swamp water, covered in volcanic ash, caked with coral mud, and they kept firing. The Japanese rifles, good weapons in their own right, seemed to suffer more from the conditions. Our guys would clean their Garands when they could. But the rifles worked, even when cleaning was impossible. The Japanese, like the Germans, faced American firepower with a fundamental disadvantage. The Arisaka Type 99 and earlier Type 38 rifles were bolt-action designs comparable to the German Mauser. Japanese soldiers were well-trained, often fanatically determined, and skilled at defensive tactics that exploited terrain. But they could not match the volume of fire that American riflemen produced. Captain George Hunt, who led a rifle company in the 1st Marine Division at Peleliu, described the tactical dynamic. The Japanese would set up their defenses in caves and bunkers, interlocking fields of fire, all very professional. Our approach was simple. We'd pour rifle fire into every opening until nothing moved, then move closer and pour in more. The Garands let us maintain that fire almost continuously. A Japanese rifleman who exposed himself to shoot was dead before he could cycle his bolt. They learned to stay hidden, which meant they couldn't shoot at us, which meant we could maneuver. The island-hopping campaigns that characterized the Pacific War became attritional struggles in which firepower often mattered more than tactical finesse. American commanders accepted that Japanese defensive positions would have to be reduced by direct assault, but they used overwhelming fire superiority to minimize casualties during those assaults. The M1 Garand was central to this approach, providing the foundation of fire upon which all other weapons built. As the war progressed, American logistical capacity ensured that every infantryman who wanted an M1 could have one. Production at Springfield Armory was supplemented by a second production line at Winchester Repeating Arms Company, and together, the two facilities produced rifles faster than they could be issued. By 1945, surplus M1 South were being placed in storage, while the war's final campaigns were still underway. This abundance contrasted sharply with the situation facing America's enemies. Germany, its industrial base, under constant bombardment, and its supply lines severed, could barely produce enough Mauser rifles to arm its dwindling forces, let alone undertake new weapons development. Japan, its shipping stranglet by submarine warfare and its factories increasingly targeted by B-29 raids, faced similar constraints. The semi-automatic rifle advantage that America had developed through 2 decades of patient effort could not be duplicated by nations fighting for survival. The human dimension of the Garand's advantage emerged most poignantly in the testimonies of those who faced it. Feldwebel Wilhelm Rosenaer, captured during the fighting in the Rhineland, described his experience to American interrogators. Every engagement with the Americans was the same. They would begin firing and the volume would immediately become overwhelming. We could not raise ourselves to aim, could not reload without being shot. Our machine guns would fire, but they would be silenced one by one. Then the Americans would advance, always shooting, never stopping. Our rifles fired once, theirs fired 8 times. There was no answer to this mathematics. Rosenauer's reference to mathematics captured a fundamental truth. Combat is not purely a matter of courage and training. It is also a matter of numbers, of rates of fire and hit probabilities, of ammunition, expenditure, and reload times. The M1 Garand shifted these numbers decisively in favor of every American who carried one. The end of the war brought assessment and reflection. Military analysts studied the weapons and tactics of all participants, compiling data and drawing conclusions that would shape post-war military development. The M1 Garand emerged from these assessments as the standard against which all infantry rifles would be measured for decades. The U.S. Army's official study of European theater operations concluded. The M1 rifle provided American infantry with a significant firepower advantage over all opponents encountered. This advantage was reflected in combat performance at every level, from individual firefights to major operations. The semi-automatic capability, combined with reliability and accuracy, made the M1 the most effective infantry rifle of the war. Similar conclusions emerged from Pacific theater studies, British assessments of American equipment, and even captured German analogs. The consensus was overwhelming. The M1 Garand had proven itself the best infantry rifle of the Second World War, and no other weapon came close. Young Garand himself received relatively modest recognition for his achievement. The Army awarded him a medal for a meritorious service, a ceremony covered by newspapers but quickly forgotten. He never sought the spotlight, preferring to remain at his workbench at Springfield Armory, continuing to refine and improve the weapon he had created. When offered patent royalties that could have made him wealthy, Garand declined. He believed that a weapon designed for his adopted country as defense should not be a source of personal profit. He lived modestly on his government salary, an engineer's pay for an engineer's work, while the rifles that bore his name equipped millions of soldiers and won a global war. Garand continued working at Springfield Armory until his retirement in 1953. He died on February 16, 1974, at the age of 86. Having lived long enough to see his rifles serve not only in World War II but in the Korean War, where it again proved itself against communist forces armed with Soviet-designed weapons. The M1 service continued even beyond Garand's death. American troops in Vietnam carried M1 rifles in the early years of that conflict, before the M14 and then the M16 replaced them. Allied nations receiving American military aid used Garands for decades. The rifles remained in National Guard armories, in reserve stocks, in the hands of civilian marksmen who appreciated their accuracy and reliability. Today, more than 80 years after the first M1 rolled off the Springfield production line, the rifle remains in use. The civilian marksmanship program sells surplus Garands to American citizens, continuing a tradition of marksmanship that the rifle helped establish. Collectors pay premium prices for examples with wartime provenance. Veterans organizations honor the weapon in ceremonies and memorials. The M1 Garand has become an icon, a symbol of American industrial might and engineering excellence, a physical reminder of what the nation accomplished in its greatest crisis. But the rifle's truest legacy lies not in museums or collections, but in the survival of the men who carried it. Every American soldier who came home from World War II carrying an M1 Garand owed something to John Garand's genius. The rifle's rate of fire, its reliability, its rugged construction, all translated into tactical advantages that saved lives impossible to count. The German and Japanese soldiers who faced the Garand learned to respect and fear it. Their military establishments, unable to match American industrial capacity, could only watch as their soldiers died under volumes of fire they could not return. The mathematics that Feldwebel Rosenauer described in his interrogation, the 8 rounds to 5, the continuous fire against the bolt-action pause, accumulated across millions of individual engagements into a strategic advantage that could not be overcome. This is the story of the M1 Garand, weapon created by an immigrant engineer who devoted his life to his adopted country as defense. Produced by an industrial system capable of miracles, carried by soldiers who trusted it with their lives, feared by enemies who could not match it. It was not the only reason America won World War II. But it was a reason, a tangible, measurable advantage in the most fundamental arena of warfare. The infantry firefight. When Feldwebel Heinrich Vogler raised his Mauser in the Hürtgen forest on that September morning in 1944, he faced an enemy who could fire 8 rounds in the time he could fire 2. The mathematics were pitiless. The American who killed him was not necessarily braver, not necessarily more skilled, not necessarily better trained. He was better armed. In the arithmetic of combat, that was enough. The M1 Garand gave American infantry a deadly edge. Millions of soldiers carried that edge into battle, and millions of them came home because of it. In the calculus of war, no higher praise exists.